So, Deborah Melman, lovely to see you. Rachel Griffiths, fantastic to meet you. We're here talking about total control. We're going to do a quick recap on one and kind of drill into several elements about the politics, the women, the portrayal of women, the symbolism, and then I'm hoping to tease a little bit about series two out of you. So if we could go back to the very, very beginning, and I guess Rachel Griffiths, this starts with you and the producer Darren Dale. You're an exec on the show as well and co-creator. Can you go back and tell us what came first? Was it the genre of the political thriller that you wanted to be in, or was it the issues that you wanted to portray? How did it come into being?
Um, I kind of had the germ of the idea for this show in my middle 20s when I was doing a voiceover for a documentary around an Indigenous land rights claim. And there was a young Indigenous community leader who was just so extraordinary and inspiring. And I remember hearing stories about what she was copying from the community because it involved shutting down a large mine. And at the same time, another friend of mine was one of the youngest parliamentarians, female, ever to get into Australia. She became a senator, I think, around the age of 24. And I remember being just so struck by the gendered nature of what she copped in the media, and it was pretty relentless. A real sense that she had no right to be in that space, that she was some kind of fraud, or she got in because she was cute. I mean, it was just really quite dreadful. I grew up with a female premier in my own state, also in my adolescent years, and I think all of it kind of just swirled in together. And there's been other First Nations women who have gone into politics, and it's just been very clear that what they cop is a double down. You know, it's absolutely clear that being female and Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander means you will get twice the shit. And you will be entering spaces where you are constantly made to feel that you are an imposter and that you've got no right to be there. So I've been deeply interested in politics for a very long time. I'm a real wonk on politics.
Oh no, yeah.
So
What is a
I'm
wonk?
kind of,
That's a colloquialism. What is a wonk, please?
well, I'm kind of a nerd. Like, I'm a voting system nerd. We're one of two democracies in the world that vote on a Saturday. I think we're only one of two that have compulsory voting. So at university and school, I studied the impact of things like proportional versus preferential, or in the UK, you have first past the post, and that kind of binary nature, and what kind of political collective brain gets elected through these systems. So I'm really interested in the orders and the articles of how parliaments run as well. So my idea for a political thriller was much less kind of House of Cards, people climbing each other for power, but really to kind of have a sexy show about how our democracy works, while also asking, you know, some pretty challenging things about what we ask of our parliamentarians, particularly our women, our First Nations, and people of colour, and regional disadvantage. So much politics here is very concentrated out of Sydney and Canberra, and I think in the UK it's London, and in America it's very much around Washington, New York, and the tri-state and California. So we kind of wanted to talk about the outsider in all these layers of difficulty and disadvantage for her constituents were. But the byline is interesting because, you know, I think certainly for episode one, this, you know, our series is much less about, is this girl going to blow everything up, and more about, can she endure in order to actually make systematic generational change? You know, I say our show is very Deb of Winton, like it's Mare of Easton. Can she hold it together under all the pressure she's under? With all the people she's carrying and all the shit that happens to her and all the trauma she's had, can she hold it together and endure long enough to be standing and alive to make things better?
Tell us, how did you get cast?
How did I get cast?
It was always Deb.
Did she always say yes?
Yes. I was never going to say no.
It's just extraordinary that probably the most awarded actor in Australia is Deb Mailman, and she's never had a lead role. Like, it was just screaming as the most outrageous and overdue requirement of the industry to actually find something that met this actress. And Darren doesn't make anything if he doesn't think there's an actor for it.
How do you feel about that, Deborah?
Look, this has been a dream role, and when I got the call from Darren to say, look, I know that they've always been wanting to find a vehicle of production for me, and it's always amazing. It's always fantastic when you work with a group of people that you absolutely trust wholeheartedly, that you know that your back's going to be looked after, that the words on the page are going to be finessed until the very end, that the dynamic of other actors within the space are going to work equally, and to create a show that is going to be high-end quality. I mean, they're all the components you want as an actor to come into, and that's absolutely because of the team. Rachel Griffiths, Darren Dale and Rachel Perkins and Blackfella Films. I mean, there's complete trust around that process, and it was a no-brainer, absolute no-brainer to be part of this production and to play the role of Alex.
Brilliant. And you'd worked with Rachel Perkins before, hadn't you?
I had. My first feature film was with Rachel Perkins over 20-something years ago in the film Radiance, and since then we've had a number of productions over the years, but this is certainly one of the big ones for me.
Did you come from such a political background?
I sort of had a sense of it, but I certainly sort of nowhere near the sort of fervour that Griffiths has for sort of the political arena. I guess the role came about, Darren Dale. I've had a long working history with him and Rachel Perkins and Blackfella Films. I've done a number of productions with them, and I think Darren was always trying to find a project for me that could really be a great role for me. And obviously Rachel Griffiths and Darren, they've had that conversation before I came into that. And so Darren called me and said, look, we have a fabulous role. We have a really great project that we hope that you're interested in. I was sent maybe one of the very first earlier drafts of episode 1 and fell in love with Alex instantly. It was such a great read off the page, and it's a world that I didn't know much about, but certainly wanted to be a part of, and sort of that's where it all began, really, for me.
I think one of the most interesting things politically, about Alex Irving is Alex Irving has come from the conservative side of politics, and I think, for many, inner city greenies and lefties, there's, a sense that all First Nations people would be, all left-wing, and they're not. Alex is this extraordinary, she's had a background in the military, she lives in a very conservative electorate, and her people have voted, from where she's come, her people have voted for that coalition for probably a century, never been a Labor Party. So the thing that makes our politics different, quite frankly, is that voting is compulsory. So our centre is our centre, we have a fully elected upper house, unlike England, where you have still the legacy of hereditary peers. And we have a preferential voting system, which basically means the least hated person gets elected. Whereas first past the post, it's quite different. So we've got this great, well, do you like him? Oh, he's all right. But do you hate him? Yeah, I hate him. So the guy everyone hates doesn't get in, or the girl people are, I can live with that. I can live with that. Oh, good. All right. Well, let's live with that one. It's very interesting, but that's why we ultimately are always a moderate government.
I've got a SeriesFest question now. Aidan Yarrigal from Los Angeles has asked, what were some of your concerns when you went to pitch the show, and how did you address them? Is it easy to pitch a political show to the ABC because you have public funding, etc.? Does that make a difference?
Well, look, this is where I had this kind of very political show in my head that was about voting systems and gender and intersectionality of gender and race. But, my experience of all the issues that First Nations people carry every single day was, very limited. It's been a huge journey for me to go from that like political wonk with an idea, and it's Darren understanding, when I pitched him really just a sketch of the show, about an Indigenous woman who's brings down the government. He understood what more the story could carry in ways, and Deb did as well, that I could never have understood. So when Darren was pitching this, and I don't really remember being in on those pitches, the pitch really is the opportunity to draw a really diverse range of First Nations experiences and issues, and kind of package them in a delivery system, the political drama that somehow feels familiar, but allows people to actually experience more and become aware of more than they knew they were going to have. And then, of course, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are watching it, they are seeing their lives represented, their issues represented, their struggle represented, and a real kind of litmus test of where we are as a nation represented. So that was really Darren's genius. I can't take any credit for that.
And we also don't really have much of a history of political drama in our sort of cinema landscape as well. So to sort of try and pitch a show that is around politics, I think no doubt was a challenge. But as Rachel said, it was very much about the here and now, and what our audience and also the general public of Australia have been part of for the last, 6 or 7 years of our political life here, and that sort of sweeping changes that have happened. People are far more understanding of what that process is, and the sort of, I guess, the BS that has happened over that time as well. There's been a sort of frustration around a lot of people and the general public seeing what our political system has become, or has been, how it's been playing out.
The pacing of the show within the kind of genre wrapper is astonishing, because it's like you're this bullet, and there's all these kind of minor explosions, the latent explosion always about to happen, and what they do to your character and what she has to endure is astonishing. There's a lady from SeriesFest called Brianna Washington, who's from Denver, who's succinctly wrapped this up. So I'm going to read her question out in full, if I may. My first question is about Alex being in such close proximity to so much death. We open up on the pilot episode with her having a woman die in her arms, stopping a gunman who then kills himself, and another woman is killed by the gunman. Then Alex's mother dies, and she sees Jess murdered, hit by a car right in front of her. I'm wondering, are we going to let her grieve? You don't get time to grieve, do you? The trajectory is terrifying.
It's where we started season 2, really, with that very question, didn't we, Deb? We were like, does she get a chance, or is this trauma just accumulating?
And when you're talking about First Nations stories, I mean, it is a cumulative grief. And it's a reality, unfortunately, and a reality for a lot of our communities in regards to that sort of, that trauma and that grief. But also, I think, to begin with, and just as a very much of a plot point, to have something that pushes her into the mind of the Prime Minister. I mean, to find something that actually caught the Prime Minister's eye, to sort of think of that sort of that whatever that was, to sort of have the video go viral, for them to catch the Prime Minister's eye, for them to be handpicked and sort of piloted into Parliament. It had to be something that was as horrific as that very first scene.
So could you tell us more about the filming? Did you actually film in Canberra?
We filmed everywhere. Yes, we did. We were in both old and new Parliament House, which is fabulous to film and to get access to that. We filmed in Winton in season 1 and in Sydney.
From where Alex comes from in Queensland, it's probably the equivalent of coming in from St. Petersburg as an electorate into London. So for, any of the politicians that work in Canberra and their electorates in Sydney, they get home, Friday night 5 for dinner. But if you live in Winton, you get home Sunday afternoon. So it was very important, I think, to show that regional, the disadvantage to representing those people, but and that extra weight of, I think we wanted to just really have such a clear division between these two worlds that she is finding her way between. So there are other remote areas that she could have been from, but it's also up the road from where Deb was born, so I wouldn't be surprised if a bit of it was just that.
Yeah, I love that she's from Queensland because I know that country so well, and I certainly know the issues that affect those communities so well. So it was great that the character of Alex was from there.
Can we talk about the women again, but contrast it to the women in the mob? Because your mom is such a wonderful, wonderful character. And I'd just like to talk about how her love for the Queen, a female authority figure, and how you felt that reflected back into the kind of the current political situation that your character was living in.
Well, interesting enough, you find my actual dad was very much a monarchist, and he loved the Queen as well. And I think you find a generation of that generation of First Nations people who very much grew up in that world and love the Queen, love the idea of service. And there's a wonderful line that Mum says in the film, what's the line, Rach, about the sort of...
Something like 70 years of service and not a sick day or not a complaint or something.
That really sort of resonates, I think, for a lot of people who know the idea of hard work. And certainly that older generation, my mum and dad's generation, my grandparents, they certainly know what it means to be in the service of and to be, working really hard. But, I mean, Alex, in terms of, I don't think there's a conflict with that.
No, I don't see the conflict. I think it was to me, it came across as a very positive role model for women and women who, take the roles seriously and take the responsibilities seriously.
I think it's also the other surprising element, as Rachel was saying, you often think that, Indigenous people are sort of left-wing, to have someone who's absolutely about the monarchy, or at least loves the Queen, not necessarily the institution, but certainly that person and that woman who's worked really hard all her life. I mean, I think there's probably there's a strength that is recognised in someone serving for that long and without complaint.
And the politics within the mob, if that's the right way, if I'm describing that correctly, again, it's obviously very complicated and you're not going to be able to explain it to me properly in 2 minutes because it's far too complex. But the impressions that I was getting were that the women do hold power. It's a very macho environment, as Australian politics are macho as well. But women do hold power and sway.
Oh, there's certainly some communities, I'm not saying all, but certainly there's very matriarchal communities within First Nations. Not all, but there's certainly some. But women certainly have an equal role, always has traditionally, and within the contemporary world of sharing that sort of responsibility with the men. And that's always sort of been side by side. But certainly it's the women in the communities that do the teaching, that do the, and sort of share that information. And I'm not quite sure what my point is, but I
That's
just,
really interesting.
I just think it's a surprising element where you have someone like Jan, my mother, who is of the stolen generation, caused by white Australia policy, to still then be absolutely enamoured and admiring someone like the Queen. Like, it's just you can't explain it, I don't think, but it's a surprising element which I really love about these characters in this show. It doesn't, so no one fits neatly into a perceived idea of what a person should be.
And there is another great kind of masculine feminine tug and pull between Deborah and her brother, and her brother's had the big fancy, education, and her brother's, the professor, and it's kind of brings a bit of gender politics of who's worthy of being kind of elevated from community to the national stage. And the shock is, I think everyone thought it would be Charlie, that he was destined. He was the smart boy. He finished school while Alex was, tearing around, and finally kind of, I think she was a bit of a wild child and on the tear, and the army sorted her out. But there's this kind of recalibration that it's not Charlie who is, because he's right out of central casting as, be the, hottest politician in, that's for sure. But it's a recalibration between Charlie and Alex, when Alex is like, and he is more left wing, and he is, he has read, critical race theory. But Alex is just coming from this grassroots community health service, kind of in the footsteps of her mother, and the Queen before her.
There's a lot of symbolism in the show, isn't there? And there's a lot laid onto Alex's character. If you start the kind of the burning bush, and Liv, one of the SeriesFest viewers in Los Angeles, did say that the burning tree, not quite as a bush, is a burning tree, early on seemed to her very monumental and symbolic. So what was your thought process as a creator behind such an important scene? And then also, as you said before, it's an endurance. It's a journey, and there's baptism and fire along the way. How did you plot that? Did you presumably had to work that into a kind of, as an actress, to kind of say what you felt that you could portray with genuine authenticity?
You're really speaking, if you're speaking motives and reoccurring kind of moods and textures, I just think that's the genius of Rachel, understanding the unscripted moments and the need to balance what we used to call the blah, 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 especially the white fella blah, blah, with a much more visceral and emotional show. So between Deb, inhabiting that character, and Rachel designing those opportunities, I feel like it more, wouldn't you say, Deb?
Yeah, and it's certainly the idea of the burning tree, and I mean that has many meanings. I mean, for me, I saw that as an awakening within Alex. It's also when you look at a fire that is uncontrollable, but it's certainly, I think there's a duality within that sort of that fire and that fury that comes from a fire, but also and the fear of that. But there's an awakening. It's a very spiritual sort of part of the story that Rachel was talking about, in terms of I'm not always having to be the sort of explaining it in words, but there is a spirituality that comes within the sense of things being on fire. It's certainly an awakening, particularly within First Nations culture.
Can we talk about some of the other characters? If we stay in series 1, so one of the things I thought was incredible was the way that the tension of JC's journey to Canberra, and you were, as an audience member, you were so scared for her. There were so many threats, and obviously some of it was made manifest, the guy at the pool, but everyone seemed to be a potential threat to her, kind of carrying this torch for truth. So could you talk perhaps about Rachel? Were you involved in her casting?
No, I was not across any of the First Nations casting. I kind of weighed in on the political world because that's what I knew I wanted the feel of.
Can you just perhaps chat about the other cast?
Well, just to speak to that JC, I mean, she had never acted before, and again, hats off to Rachel Perkins for just making her feel that she could put those marks down. But that was a storyline that really came from Miranda Deer and the writers' room, the other co-creator of season 1, and I think it was quite a brilliant stroke, actually. Not only incredibly tragically predictive. That video that she's carrying is "I Can't Breathe" before George Floyd. I mean, it was kind of spooky, and when that happened, we all went, "God," that we'd filmed that, and that is still happening to people of color around the world. But Indigenous deaths in custody is a massive shame on our nation that is unaddressed. Since the Royal Commission, there's been over 512 deaths in custody. So I think that goes back to, that it's not just a political show, but politics can be the answer to things that need to be addressed, So we are interested in politics sitting, as the solution. Government can be the solution, not just the problem. And that's why we are wanting Alex's character to be successful so she can stop this happening and she can stop that sense of threat to young Indigenous people in this country, which, Deb should talk to, genuinely.
Oh, no, actually, Rachel, what you said was perfect. I mean, the threat, unfortunately, is very real. And the idea of paralleling those worlds of Canberra and then of a young girl who is other people affected by the policies and the decisions that are being made within Canberra. To have those sort of worlds sort of start encroaching upon each other, I think is a really, more than an interesting way. I think it's a great way to show how they do collide sometimes and they sort of encroach on each other. And I think it was, like Rachel was saying, a stroke of genius to sort of see that world being through the lens of a young Indigenous woman. Girl, I should say, yeah.
Had you worked with other of the actors in the mob?
I'm trying to think. Rob Collins, I think I've worked with before. Rachel Perkins, I've worked as the director in many productions. Aaron Patterson, I have worked before in Mystery Road. But the other fabulous thing was meeting all the other new faces that I hadn't worked with before. Harry, who plays Jonathan. Also, Shantae, who plays JC. I hadn't, she's very much a newcomer to our industry and played the role beautifully. And so it's really great to sort of, and Rachel Perkins is very much about creating those opportunities for our young storytellers to come through, and very much what Blackfellow Films is about, is trying to create those opportunities for our young actors and to have new faces on screen. Yeah, there's a bit of old and new and familiar and not so familiar within sort of the making of season 1.
Can we move on to teasing season 2 now, please? So I know that there's not too much you must give away, but for example, if we start behind the scenes, same crew, same writers, perhaps, or
different director this time around. We have the amazing Wayne Blair as our director, who is also taking on one of the roles within the production. Obviously, Darren and Rachel are still there. There's still some continuing faces and characters within the world, and again, some fantastic fresh new faces and new characters that you'll get to see in season 2.
And what else can they possibly do to you, or to do to Alex Irving, that they didn't do in series 1?
Oh my God, season 1 was just the beginning.
No, seriously.
Deb didn't have to get elected in season 1, so in season 2 she has to face that election. So as we've all just survived watching the American election, and the British, it's also in recent minds, elections are brutal. Campaigns are nasty. They are personal. They are organised. There are elements of the media political system that are, will never give you a break and will never stop being relentless in their attack. So there's plenty more heat. And also, Alex has a son who is growing up and is also grieving. His grandmother has seen his mum go through so much, but is also kind of losing her. So at the heart of, season 2, while all this is happening, it is what are Alex's home obligations. Do you want to talk to that, Deb?
Yeah, I think you're finding that the world expands a little bit more, so it's not just about how Alex is responding to, we actually are seeing the consequences of, and how that is affecting her son Eddie, how it affects Charlie. Also, the sort of regional issues really come to the forefront within season 2 about a lot of the threats. I mean, just complete lack of support within regional Australia, and so the sort of consequences of that, where there's no funding, there's no infrastructure, so that's really pushed to the forefront, and it's what Alex continues to fight for and continues to want to change within her position.
And then, of course, Rachel has a wonderful journey because she starts humiliated, deposed, and seething with rage that everything that she has worked for has been blown up by a woman she thinks should be grateful at the very least, who's brought her down. But their kind of obsession with each other, or they can't live with each other and almost can't live without each other in certain ways. And the plot is going to be really kind of interesting about how their paths cross and what tangent will they perhaps collide on again. So we see a lot more of kind of Rachel, not just as Prime Minister, but as a woman, a conservative woman who has been sucking up shit for so long. She realizes at a certain point that it atrophied her. Like, she missed the bus. It's like, wow, can I become a feminist now? I'm 52. Is it too late, for me to take the pearls and handbag off? And she thought she was doing everything she had to do as a woman to toe that party line, but what does it actually cost her in terms of her own authenticity? And so it's a kind of great journey, I think, for Rachel. She's more 3D this year. But we've got, as Deb said, a wonderful cast of new First Nations talent that we haven't seen, just to make this universe, because it's not just one mob. There's, a very, it's a big world there that, in Australian television, it's often been lumped together, and there is no, we want to explore every archetype possible.
It sounds fabulous, and with you two, the two female characters that you both portray, spending more quality time with each other is definitely a appointment to view, isn't it?
I don't know if we've got quality time.
Thank you very much for the conversation today.
You're welcome, Rachel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.